Tonight, we set aside the polished armor and fairy tale castles to delve into a far grimmer period of history. Our destination is the raw, unforgiving world of the Middle Ages, an era defined less by chivalry and more by the ever-present spectre of disease, the swift hand of brutal justice, and the gnawing emptiness of a stomach filled with little more than gruel. The romanticized version you've seen in films is a comforting illusion. The truth is a stark and brutal tapestry woven with hardship and suffering. You are about to discover what life was truly like for the vast majority, and you will quickly realize that surviving even a single day would be a monumental achievement. Let's begin this journey into the dark heart of the past, where the simplest acts of living were a daily battle. Your first sensation upon waking in the year 1325 is not the gentle light of dawn, but the damp, musty chill of your surroundings. You lie upon a mattress that is less a piece of bedding and more a decaying sack of straw, teeming with fleas and other unseen insects that have made a home in its rotting fibers. There is no concept of comfort here, no plush pillows, no soft sheets, only a single, coarse woolen blanket. This blanket, unwashed for countless seasons, has become stiff and heavy with an accumulation of sweat, dirt, and grime. Feeling less like a covering and more like a damp, oppressive weight pinning you to the earth, it offers little warmth, serving only as a meagre shield against the biting cold of the pre-dawn air. The day officially begins not with a gentle alarm, but with the deafening, iron clang of the distant church bell, a sound that resonates through the village with an unmerciful finality. It's a summons to another day of toil. Your home is a humble, one-room hut constructed from rough-hewn wood, featuring a perpetually damp dirt floor and no windows to speak of. This dwelling operates on what could be charitably called an open concept plan, where personal space is a foreign concept. You share this cramped interior not only with your entire family, but also with your precious livestock, whose warmth is a small comfort against the cold, but whose presence adds to the claustrophobic reality of your existence. The air inside your hut is a thick, inescapable assault on the senses, a complex symphony of odors that tells the story of your life. The dominant notes are the sour stench of stale, low-alcohol beer, the sharp tang of constant human sweat, and the earthy, animal scent of the goat sharing your living quarters. Woven into this is a faint, damp smell of decay that you desperately hope isn't mold, though deep down you know it has taken root in the thatched roof and wooden walls. The modern luxury of a scented candle is centuries away from invention. Even if it existed, it would be a pointless extravagance, its wax melting into the packed earth floor without making a dent in the overwhelming miasma of medieval life. As you attempt to stretch your limbs, a chorus of creaks and pops emanates from your joints, a painful reminder of the physical burdens of your time. Though you are only 22 years old, your body feels ancient, worn down by relentless manual labor and inadequate nutrition. In this era, you are considered to be approaching middle age. Your spine groans like the hinges of a weathered door, and your knees grind with a sound reminiscent of stones being shaken in a leather bag. The youthful vitality we take for granted today is a luxury you cannot afford. Every movement is a negotiation with a body that is prematurely aged, a vessel that has endured far more hardship than it was ever designed to withstand in such a short span of time. Swinging your legs out of your straw bed is an act of faith, as you never know what your bare feet will encounter. The packed earth floor exists in one of two states, both equally unpleasant. It might be a slick, cold mud, a result of last night's rain seeping relentlessly through the poorly constructed thatched roof above. Alternatively, it could be covered in a dry, crusty layer of unidentifiable filth. Perhaps a parting gift from your neighbour's chicken that wandered in during the night. Either way, the moment your skin makes contact with the ground, you are instantly and intimately connected to the unhygienic ecosystem of your home, a world where cleanliness is an unattainable fantasy. The concept of personal privacy is utterly alien in this world. As you rise, you do so in full view of your entire family, parents, siblings, and perhaps a stray cousin who arrived one day and simply never departed. There are no separate bedrooms to retreat to, no curtains to draw for a moment of solitude, no such thing as me time. Every aspect of life, from sleeping to waking, is a communal affair. Your existence is a shared one, an unending performance on a crowded stage. Welcome to the medieval morning, a time where you can never truly be alone, for you are constantly accompanied by a host of parasites, a scuttling audience of rodents, and at least 8 other people. Having successfully navigated the initial hazards of consciousness, your body now issues its next, more urgent demand. This is not a polite request, it is a primal, biological scream that eclipses all other thoughts. At this moment, the simple, miraculous convenience of a modern bathroom becomes a painfully distant dream. Here, in the 14th century, the act of relieving yourself is stripped of all dignity. There is no porcelain toilet, no toilet paper, no concept of a flushing mechanism, and certainly no plunger waiting dutifully in the corner for emergencies. Answering nature's call is a raw, public, and often perilous adventure that you must embark upon every single day. As a peasant, your designated lavatory is likely a simple wooden bucket, strategically placed in a corner or just outside the hut's only door. It is almost certainly already full, a testament to the previous night's activities and your Uncle Wolfstan's unfortunate encounter with some questionable turnips. The stench emanating from it is potent enough to be a physical presence. Holding your breath, you quickly do your business. The final step of this ritual involves gathering the bucket's contents and unceremoniously launching them into the street. This daily act contributes to the ever-growing river of waste that defines your village's thoroughfares. Before you jettison the contents of your chamber, pot out the window or door, social custom dictates you shout a warning to any unsuspecting passers-by below. The common cry is, "Gardez you," a phrase from Old French that translates to, "Watch out for the water." In practice, this courtesy often proves futile, as the reaction time of a person on the street is rarely sufficient to avoid the descending deluge of human waste. This ritual, repeated by households throughout the town, ensures that the streets remain in a perpetual state of filth, making every walk a hazardous journey. The simple act of looking up while walking could have disgusting consequences. The medieval street is not merely dirty, it is a functioning open sewer, a slow-moving river of unimaginable filth. Its contents are a rich and horrifying tapestry of daily life. The primary component is human excrement, tossed from every window and doorway. This is mixed with the droppings of domestic animals like pigs, geese, and chickens that roam freely. Adding to the sludge is the waste from local businesses' blood, entrails, and offal from the town butcher, foul-smelling liquids from tanneries, and a general collection of household refuse. All of this combines into a thick, putrid mud that cakes the cobblestones and fills the air with a gag-inducing stench. If you happen to reside in a larger, more organised town, you might have access to a public latrine. However, This is far from a luxurious alternative. These structures are built for efficiency, not comfort, often consisting of a long wooden bench with several holes cut into it, positioned directly over a running stream or a deep cesspit. Privacy is a completely foreign concept here. You would sit shoulder to shoulder with friends, neighbours, and complete strangers, conducting your business in full view of one another. While this might offer an opportunity for small talk or the exchange of gossip, the overpowering stench and lack of ventilation make it a truly miserable social experience. In an era before the mass production of paper, the question of what to use for wiping is answered with whatever nature or household scraps can provide. For most people, the solution is a handful of straw, a clump of soft moss, a few broad leaves, or a rag torn from old clothing. For those with slightly more means, a scrap of wool might be considered a small indulgence. The least fortunate might use nothing at all. This reality of personal hygiene sheds considerable light on why the handshake had not yet become a popular form of greeting. Physical contact was a gamble, and it was often safer to keep one's hands to oneself. Residing within the stone walls of a castle offers a marginal, yet significant, improvement in toileting technology. Here, you might have access to a garderobe, which is essentially a small, private chamber protruding from the castle wall with a hole in the floor. This chute offers a direct line of deposit to the moat encircling the fortress below, or, in some cases, a dedicated cesspit at the base of the wall. For the nobility, this was the height of convenience and sanitation, whisking the waste away and out of sight. It provided a degree of privacy and separation from the filth that was simply unimaginable for the common peasant living in a hut or a crowded town. While the garderobe was a step up from a bucket, it came with its own unique set of problems and dangers. The chute leading down the castle wall was a potential point of entry for determined enemies. There are historical accounts of attackers launching surprise assaults by bravely, or foolishly, climbing up these waste-filled shafts to infiltrate the castle from within. Furthermore, the open hole presented a very real danger, especially for children or for anyone stumbling in the dark. One wrong step could lead to a long, undignified fall into the moat below. Regardless of your social status, medieval toileting remained a fundamentally humiliating and hazardous daily ritual. Having survived the morning's sanitary challenges, you might now be dreaming of a rewarding breakfast. Banish any thoughts of warm, comforting, or delicious food. Such luxuries are not part of your reality. The medieval European breakfast is a grim, utilitarian affair designed for subsistence, not pleasure. There are no sizzling eggs, no freshly brewed coffee, and certainly no artisanal bread with avocado. Instead, you squat by the central hearth and are handed a rough-hewn wooden bowl. Inside is a lumpy, greyish substance that looks as if it has been scraped from the bottom of a muddy boot. A meal that must be endured rather than enjoyed. Your daily sustenance is a dish known as pottage, a term that covers a wide range of thick, gloopy stews. It is less a specific recipe and more a perpetual, edible experiment simmering in a single pot over the fire for days, or even weeks on end. The base consists of whatever grains are on hand, oats, barley, or rye, mixed with root vegetables like turnips and carrots, and perhaps a handful of peas or beans if the harvest was good. New ingredients are simply added on top of the old, creating a continuously evolving slop. Its primary virtues are that it is warm and filling, providing the bare minimum of calories needed for a day of hard labour. To accompany your bowl of pottage, you are given a large hunk of bread, but it bears no resemblance to the soft loaves of today. This medieval bread is incredibly dense and hard, crafted from coarse flours like rye or barley, as wheat is a luxury reserved for the rich. To make the grain supply last longer, bakers often bulked up the dough with less savoury ingredients, such as ground-up acorns, beans, sawdust, or even dirt. The resulting loaf is so tough that it could practically be used as a shield. You do not simply slice this bread, you must wrestle with it, breaking off chunks to soften in your stew, a process that requires significant effort from your already aching jaw. You will not be washing down your gritty breakfast with orange juice or milk. The beverage of choice for every member of the family at every age is beer. This isn't a matter of morning indulgence, it is a critical survival strategy. The local water sources, rivers, streams, and wells, are hopelessly contaminated with human waste and animal filth, making them breeding grounds for parasites and deadly bacteria. The brewing process, which involves boiling the water, effectively sterilizes it, making the resulting small beer a much safer option. With a very low alcohol content, it provides hydration without causing immediate disease, a crucial trade-off in a world without sanitation. The thought of adding meat or cheese to your morning meal is a fantasy reserved for the wealthiest members of society. For a peasant, these protein-rich foods are a rare treat, typically consumed only on major feast days or during the Christmas season, and even then, only in small quantities. The most common meat available was pork, as pigs were relatively easy to raise, but a peasant family was lucky to eat fresh meat more than a handful of times per year. Most of the time, any meat they had would be heavily salted and preserved to last through the long winter months, its flavour a distant memory by the time it was consumed. The modern palate, accustomed to a world of flavour, would be shocked by the blandness of the medieval diet. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg were astronomically expensive, imported from distant lands and worth more than their weight in gold. Their use was a conspicuous display of wealth reserved for royalty and the highest nobility. For the common person, the only available seasonings were garlic, onions, and, if they were fortunate, salt. Salt itself was a precious commodity, vital for preserving food, and was often locked away for safekeeping. Consequently, the typical meal tasted of little more than its base ingredients, a monotonous and gritty affair. Even the staple of your diet, rye bread, carries a hidden and terrifying risk. During damp growing seasons, a fungus known as ergot could infect the rye grain, appearing as a dark, purplish growth. Unbeknownst to the medieval peasant, consuming this tainted flour was akin to ingesting a powerful hallucinogen laced with poison. The resulting condition, egotism, was known as St. Anthony's fire and caused horrifying symptoms, excruciatingly painful burning sensations in the limbs, severe convulsions, terrifying hallucinations, and gangrene that could lead to the loss of fingers, toes, or entire limbs before culminating in a painful death. Should you fall ill or injure yourself, you cannot turn to a trusted doctor for evidence-based care. Instead, you must submit yourself to the world of medieval medicine, a practice that feels more like a blend of theological doctrine and polite torture than a healing art. The practitioners of this era operated on a set of principles that had little to do with biology or chemistry and everything to do with ancient theories and the perceived will of God. Your fate would be placed in the hands of a barber, surgeon, or a physician whose diagnostic tools were superstition and whose treatments were often more dangerous than the ailment itself. The cornerstone of all medical diagnosis in the Middle Ages is the ancient Greek theory of the four humours. According to this doctrine, the human body contains four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A healthy person is one in whom these four humours are perfectly balanced, like a well-made soup. Every ailment, from a simple cough or a skin rash to a raging fever or a bout of depression, is attributed to an imbalance, an excess or deficiency of one or more of these fluids. The physician's entire goal is not to cure a specific disease, but to restore this delicate internal equilibrium through a variety of often invasive methods. If your diagnosis is an excess of blood, a common conclusion for ailments involving fever, inflammation, or high spirits, the prescribed treatment is bloodletting. The task of draining your vital fluids often falls to a barber surgeon, the same individual who cuts your hair. This procedure is typically carried out in one of two ways. The practitioner might use a sharp instrument called a lancet to make an incision in a vein, allowing your blood to drain into a bowl. The alternative method involves the application of live leeches to your skin, which then suck out the excess blood. This practice, rooted in the belief that it would restore humoral balance, frequently left the patient weaker and more vulnerable to infection. Should you find yourself afflicted with sadness or anxiety, the diagnosis would point to an overabundance of black bile, the humour associated with melancholy. The prescribed cure would be just as physical and unpleasant as bloodletting. You would be subjected to powerful laxatives or herbal purges, designed to violently expel the offending substance from your body. The medieval physician saw your emotional state not as a psychological issue, but as a mechanical one, a problem to be solved by flushing the system. While you endured this treatment, your family might offer prayers, but they would also be prudently starting to carve your coffin, just in case the cure proved fatal. In the unfortunate event of a broken bone or a severe wound, you would face a truly terrifying ordeal. The concept of anesthesia was a distant dream. The only relief from the agony of surgery was to faint from the pain itself. The surgeon, often the local barber, would operate with knives and saws that had likely not been cleaned since the last war. Any heating of these tools over a fire was not for sterilization, a concept that didn't exist, but perhaps to cauterize a wound, or simply because they appeared more intimidating that way. With no antibiotics to fight infection, the chances of surviving the procedure were often slim, making surgery a desperate last resort. The very idea that invisible germs cause disease was centuries away from discovery. Instead, illnesses were commonly blamed on miasma, or bad air, foul smells that were thought to carry sickness on the wind. An even more prevalent belief was that your affliction was a direct punishment from God, a divine retribution for some moral failure or sinful thought you had committed. If you suffered from a stomach ailment, for instance, it was not due to tainted food, but rather to your own sinful nature. The prescribed treatment would involve confessing your transgressions to a priest while you writhed in agony, seeking spiritual purity as your only hope for a physical cure. Your entire wardrobe would consist of a single outfit, a uniform of poverty and discomfort you would wear day in and day out for months, or even years. This would typically be a rough, scratchy tunic made of wool or a shift crafted from linen, an abrasive garment that offered little comfort. The notion of changing clothes with the seasons was an absurdity. You simply wore your one tunic until it either disintegrated from use or became a breeding ground for a fungal infection. Underwear was an optional luxury, meaning most peasants endured the constant chafing of coarse wool directly against their skin, a perpetual state of itchy, sweaty misery for the 90% of the population who were peasants. Your job was a simple, brutal contract labour for someone else's benefit or perish. You would work the land from the moment the sun rose until it vanished below the horizon, a relentless cycle of toil that lasted 6 days a week. Your tools were primitive, a heavy wooden hoe, a dull iron sickle, and the sheer force of your own body. The concept of a weekend did not exist. Sunday was your only day of rest, and even that was conditional, often usurped by the urgent demands of the harvest, the need to defend against raiders, or the obligation to attend lengthy church services. Your existence as a peasant was defined by serfdom, a condition of bondage that tied you and your descendants to the land owned by a feudal lord. This was not a job you could quit, it was an inherited obligation. A significant portion of your labour was given for free as corvée, duty, which meant you could be summoned at any time to repair the lord's castle, build his roads, or dig his ditches without pay. On top of this, the church demanded a tithe, a mandatory tax requiring you to surrender 1/10 of everything you produced, every sheaf of wheat, every chicken, every egg, leaving your own family with even less to survive on. The very idea of justice in the Middle Ages was precarious and often depended on the whim of the local lord. If you were accused of a serious crime, such as theft or heresy, proving your innocence was not a matter of evidence, but of enduring a horrific physical test, known as the trial by ordeal. This practice was not seen as a punishment, but as a direct appeal to God, a method by which the divine would supposedly intervene to reveal the truth. Your guilt or innocence would be determined not by a jury of your peers, but by your ability to survive a state-sanctioned act of torture. A terrifying gamble where the odds were heavily stacked against you. The theological principle underpinning the trial by ordeal was the firm belief in judicium Dei, the judgment of God. It was thought that an omniscient and just God would not allow an innocent person to suffer unjustly. Therefore, if the accused emerged from the ordeal unharmed or healed miraculously quickly, it was taken as a divine sign of their innocence. This system placed the ultimate verdict in the hands of the divine, effectively removing human judgment from the equation. The priest and the community were merely facilitators, creating the conditions through which God's will could be dramatically and publicly demonstrated for all to see. The methods of these trials were varied and brutal. In the trial by fire, you might be forced to hold a red-hot iron bar or walk across burning coals. A more common method was the trial by water, where you would have to retrieve a stone from a cauldron of boiling water. Your scalded hand would then be bandaged and sealed. If, after 3 days, the wound was found to be healing cleanly without infection, you were declared innocent. If it festered, you were guilty. Another form involved being bound and thrown into a river. Sinking was a sign of innocence, while floating proved your guilt, as the pure water was thought to have rejected you. The average life expectancy in the Middle Ages hovered between 30 and 40 years, a statistic that paints a deceptively grim picture. This low average was not because everyone died young, but because it was heavily skewed by the appalling rates of infant and child mortality. Nearly half of all children born would perish from disease, malnutrition, or a harsh winter before they even reached the age of 5. If you were strong or lucky enough to survive the treacherous gauntlet of childhood, your chances of living into your 40s or 50s increased significantly. Reaching old age was not impossible, but it was a privilege earned by winning a lottery of survival from birth. Long before she commanded an empire, Catherine the Great was known simply as Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst. She was born into the minor German aristocracy, the daughter of a prince whose small territory in Pomerania offered little in the way of wealth or influence. However, what Sophie lacked in political standing, she more than made up for with a formidable intellect, a relentless drive, and an insatiable hunger for a greater destiny. From her youth, she possessed a sharp, observant mind and a quiet ambition that far exceeded the humble station into which she was born, qualities that would later propel her to the pinnacle of power. When the aging Russian Empress Elizabeth sought a suitable bride for her nephew and heir, the Grand Duke Peter, her gaze fell upon the young German princess. Sophie was a perfect candidate. She possessed noble blood, a Protestant faith that could be easily shed, and a reputation for being both intelligent and, crucially, malleable. At the tender age of 14, Sophie was summoned from her provincial home to the glittering, freezing capital of St. Petersburg. She was a pawn in a grand dynastic game, a foreign girl chosen to secure a lineage, but she arrived with a strategic mind that was already her own. To be accepted by the Russian court, Sophie understood that she had to become fundamentally Russian. She undertook this transformation with methodical dedication, beginning with her conversion to the Russian Orthodox faith. In a grand public ceremony, she cast off her old name and was christened Yekaterina, or Catherine. This was more than a religious formality, it was a profound act of political assimilation. She was symbolically burning the bridges back to her German past and committing herself entirely to her new homeland. She also threw herself into learning the Russian language, studying so intensely that she would walk barefoot in her cold room at night to stay awake. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was a political necessity, but it was a personal disaster that felt more like a prison than a partnership. Peter was a deeply immature and awkward man, obsessed with playing with his toy soldiers and openly contemptuous of the Russian traditions he was meant to uphold. In stark contrast, Catherine dedicated herself to mastering Russian culture, language, and religion, winning the quiet admiration of the court. Their profound incompatibility created a gulf between them, with Peter looking to his idol, Frederick the Great of Prussia, while Catherine looked to the heart of Russia itself for her future. The Russian court was a treacherous and paranoid environment, a viper's nest of shifting allegiances and deadly political games. With Empress Elizabeth's health in steady decline, a palpable tension filled the palace corridors as powerful factions jockeyed for influence over the coming succession. Every conversation was laden with hidden meaning, and every friendship was scrutinized as a potential conspiracy. As a foreign-born Grand Duchess, Catherine was under constant surveillance. Her letters were routinely intercepted and read by the Empress's spies, forcing her to learn the art of discretion and cunning to survive. While her husband, Peter, openly flaunted his disdain for Russia and alienated powerful figures, Catherine skillfully played the long game. She navigated the treacherous court with grace and dignity, quietly cultivating a network of influential allies. She charmed high-ranking military officers, befriended members of the nobility, and built a reputation for her intelligence and piety, a stark and deliberate contrast to her husband's buffoonish behavior. Her restraint was not a sign of weakness, but a calculated strategy. She was gathering support and patiently waiting for the moment when her husband's inevitable missteps would provide her with an opportunity. In the isolation of her chambers, Catherine embarked on a secret and formative intellectual journey. She devoured the works of the great Enlightenment thinkers, immersing herself in the radical ideas of French philosophers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. These texts on reason, justice, and enlightened governance were more than a pastime. They were the foundation upon which she built a vision for a new kind of Russia. While others at court were consumed by gossip and intrigue, Catherine was quietly educating herself to rule, crafting a philosophy of power that would blend absolute authority with progressive reform, a vision she would one day impose upon an entire empire. Upon Empress Elizabeth's death in 1762, Peter ascended to the throne as Peter III, and his reign began to collapse almost immediately. In a disastrously short period of just 6 months, he managed to offend every pillar of Russian society. He made a humiliating peace with Prussia, Russia's hated enemy. He insulted the clergy by attempting to reform the Orthodox Church along Protestant lines, and he openly spoke of divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. His erratic and deeply unpopular actions created a perfect storm of discontent, leaving him isolated and vulnerable at the head of an empire that despised him. With Peter having alienated the court and the military, Catherine seized her chance. In July 1762, while her husband was preoccupied at his summer palace, she enacted a brilliant and bloodless coup d'état. Aided by her lover, Grigory Orlov, and his influential brothers, she rode into St. Petersburg, dressed in the uniform of the elite Preobrazhensky regiment. The powerful Imperial Guard regiments, already loyal to her, quickly swore their allegiance, and she was proclaimed Empress Catherine VII in the Kazan Cathedral. It was a masterful and audacious move, executed with breathtaking speed and precision. Caught completely off guard and finding no allies willing to defend him, Peter III surrendered without a fight just days after the coup began. He was taken into custody and transferred to a country estate. Shortly thereafter, the palace released an official announcement that he had died from a severe case of hemorrhoidal colic. In reality, it is almost certain that he was assassinated, likely strangled by one of Catherine's supporters. His convenient death removed the final obstacle to her rule, solidifying her claim to the throne not by blood or marriage, but by sheer force of will and political maneuvering. Once securely on the throne, Catherine cultivated the image of an enlightened despot, a ruler who embraced progressive philosophy while wielding absolute power. She famously entered into a long correspondence with Voltaire, flattering the French philosopher and engaging him in debates about reason and governance, all while defending her own autocratic rule. She also became a patron to other thinkers, most notably purchasing the entire library of Danish Diderot to provide him with financial support. This public embrace of the Enlightenment was a masterful piece of public relations, casting her as a modern, intellectual monarch on the European stage. One of Catherine's most ambitious early projects was a sweeping reform of the Russian legal system, which was a chaotic and outdated patchwork of medieval laws. To this end, she convened the Legislative Commission in 1767, a grand assembly with hundreds of delegates drawn from every social class and geographic region of the empire, except for the serfs. Their monumental task was to create a new, unified code of laws for Russia, guided by the principles of the Enlightenment. This undertaking was unprecedented in its scale and represented Catherine's genuine, if idealistic, desire to modernize her nation from its very foundations. To guide the Legislative Commission, Catherine personally drafted a remarkable document known as the Nakaz, or instruction. It was less a legal code and more a political and philosophical treatise, drawing heavily on the ideas of Montesquieu and other Enlightenment thinkers. Within its pages, she advocated for principles that were radical for 18th century Russia, including the concept of equality for all citizens before the law, the restriction of capital punishment, and a condemnation of the use of torture during investigations. The Nakaz was a bold declaration of her vision for a more just and rational Russian state. Despite the grandeur of her vision, the Legislative Commission ultimately ended in failure. The delegates became bogged down in endless disputes, with nobles fiercely resisting any reforms that might threaten their traditional privileges, especially their absolute control over their serfs. Faced with this intractable opposition and the outbreak of war with the Ottoman Empire, Catherine disbanded the commission without a new legal code ever being written. The experience was a harsh lesson in the realities of Russian politics, forcing her to recognize that her enlightened ideals would always have to be balanced against the pragmatic need to keep the powerful nobility loyal to her throne. Catherine's reign was characterized by a relentlessly expansionist foreign policy, driven by the ambition to transform Russia from a distant, semi-Asiatic power into a dominant force in European affairs. Where Peter the Great had famously opened a window to the west, Catherine sought to tear down the walls entirely, projecting Russian power far beyond its traditional borders. Through a combination of shrewd diplomacy and aggressive military campaigns, she aimed to reshape the map of Europe and secure the strategic assets, most notably warm water ports, that Russian rulers had coveted for generations. One of Catherine's most defining military achievements was her series of successful campaigns waged against the formidable Ottoman Empire. These were not mere border skirmishes, they were transformative wars that fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape. Under the command of brilliant generals like Grigory Potemkin and Alexander Suvorov, Russian forces relentlessly pushed southward, capturing the strategically vital Crimean Peninsula and securing a long stretch of the northern coast of the Black Sea. This finally fulfilled a centuries-old Russian dream: access to warm water ports that would allow its navy to become a year-round force and project its influence into the Mediterranean and beyond. The culmination of the First Russo-Turkish War was the landmark Treaty of Kanaka in 1774. This was far more than a simple land exchange. It was a diplomatic triumph that tilted the balance of power in Russia's favor for the next century. The treaty granted Russia significant territory, including key ports on the Black Sea, and secured navigation rights for its merchant fleet through the crucial Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits. Most importantly, it designated Catherine as the official protector of Orthodox Christians living under Ottoman rule, giving Russia a permanent and legitimate pretext for future intervention in the internal affairs of its southern rival. Catherine also turned her strategic attention westward, toward the vast and politically unstable Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Through a series of cunning diplomatic maneuvers and military pressures, she participated in the systematic dismemberment of Poland, acting in concert with Austria and Prussia. This process occurred in 3 stages, beginning with the first partition in 1772 and concluding with the third partition in 1795, by which point the once great Commonwealth was completely erased from the map of Europe. Through these partitions, Russia annexed enormous new territories, absorbing millions of new subjects and pushing its own borders deep into Central Europe. For all her triumphs in foreign policy, Catherine's reign was nearly shattered by a massive rebellion that erupted from within her own empire. In 1773, A charismatic and obscure Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev ignited the frontier with an audacious claim. He declared himself to be none other than Peter Heather. Catherine's deceased husband, miraculously saved from assassination, to Russia's deeply oppressed serfs, disgruntled Cossacks, and persecuted religious minorities, this absurd story was a powerful symbol of hope, the return of a true Russian Tsar to overthrow the German usurper on the throne and deliver them from their suffering. Pugachev's promises resonated deeply with the disenfranchised masses of the vast Russian frontier. He vowed to abolish the crushing system of serfdom, grant land to the common people, end forced conscription, and lower taxes. His message spread like wildfire across the Volga River region, galvanizing a massive following that quickly swelled into the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Fortresses fell to his rebel army, towns were seized, and nobles were brutally slaughtered, their estates burned to the ground. For a terrifying period, it seemed as if the very fabric of the Russian Empire might tear apart under the force of this internal revolt. Shaken by the scale and ferocity of the rebellion, Catherine responded with decisive and brutal force. This was not a foreign war to be won with diplomacy, but an existential threat to her throne that had to be stamped out completely. She dispatched her most disciplined professional military forces, which systematically crushed Pugachev's poorly organized peasant army. The rebel leader was eventually captured in 1774, transported to Moscow in an iron cage for public display, and then executed by beheading. His death was a stark and bloody warning to any who would dare to challenge the absolute authority of the Empress. The Pugachev rebellion marked a definitive turning point in Catherine's reign, hardening her political philosophy. The violent uprising revealed the deep volatility of the Russian peasantry and shattered any lingering Enlightenment ideals she may have held about liberating the serfs. Fearing further instability, she abandoned the path of social reform and instead doubled down on her alliance with the nobility. To ensure their loyalty and maintain order, she granted the nobles even greater control over their serfs, effectively deepening the very system of feudal oppression that had fueled the rebellion in the first place. Stability, not philosophy, was now her guiding principle. Beyond the sphere of politics and war, Catherine's private life became the subject of intense fascination and scandal across Europe. She took a series of lovers, often handsome young officers decades her junior, in a manner that defied the conventions expected of a female monarch. Rather than hiding these relationships, she conducted them openly, frequently rewarding her favorites with titles, vast estates, and generous pensions when the affairs concluded amicably. This unapologetic command over her personal life was seen by her detractors as proof of a monstrous appetite, but it was also a radical assertion of her autonomy and power. Among her many favorites, the most significant was the brilliant and dynamic Grigory Potemkin. Their relationship transcended mere romance. It was a profound political and intellectual partnership that shaped the destiny of the Russian Empire. So deep was their bond that some historians believe they may have been secretly married. Together, they were co-rulers in all but name, collaborating on military strategy, overseeing the colonization of newly conquered southern lands, and driving the modernization of the empire. Potemkin was not just a lover, he was her equal, a co-architect of her imperial vision. In the final analysis, Catherine's legacy is one of profound and fascinating contradictions. She was the enlightened monarch who corresponded with Voltaire, yet she also expanded and entrenched the brutal institution of serfdom across her empire. She was a champion of reason and law who came to power through a coup and ruled with an iron fist. A German-born princess with no legitimate claim to the throne. She embraced her adopted country with a fierce passion, becoming one of its most effective and formidable leaders. She was a reformer, a tyrant, and a visionary, a complex figure who left Russia larger, stronger, and more powerful than ever before. Deep within the humid jungle of Chiapas, Mexico, the magnificent stone ruins of the ancient Maya city of Palenque hold countless untold stories. In 1994, a team of archaeologists led by Fanny El Pez Jimenez was conducting routine survey work on Temple Gostri, a structure overshadowed by the more famous temple of the inscriptions, the tomb of the great King Pakal. They noticed a small, sealed-off section of the substructure that seemed unusual. Breaking through, they uncovered a hidden chamber that had miraculously remained untouched by looters for more than a millennium, a pristine capsule of a forgotten world. As the research team descended into the silent, sealed chamber, the air was thick with the weight of 13 centuries. Before them rested a monolithic stone sarcophagus, its lid perfectly intact. The moment they carefully lifted the heavy limestone cover, a cloud of brilliant scarlet dust billowed out, coating the archaeologists and the room in its vibrant hue. This stunning red powder, later identified as cinnabar, covered every surface within the coffin, a clear indication that this was a burial of immense ceremonial importance and spiritual significance. Lying within the crimson-dusted sarcophagus were the fragile remains of a woman who had been laid to rest with extraordinary reverence. Her skeleton was surrounded by a wealth of funerary offerings, including elegant necklaces, diadems, and ear spools crafted from precious jade and shell. Most strikingly, her skull was adorned with a delicate mask made of mosaic jade tiles, a clear sign of her elite status. Everything about the burial, from the rich grave goods to the careful placement of the body, screamed royalty and power, pointing to a person of immense importance in Palenque's history. Despite the opulence of her burial, the tomb presented a profound and immediate puzzle. There were no identifying glyphs on the sarcophagus, no inscriptions on the chamber walls to name the woman within. This anonymity was baffling, as it was one of the richest female burials ever discovered in the entire Mesoamerican world. The archaeologists nicknamed her the Red Queen for the stunning pigment that enveloped her, a title that captured the mystery and grandeur of her final resting place. Her identity became an enigma that would challenge researchers for decades to come. The most visually stunning and ritually significant feature of the tomb was the thick layer of powdered cinnabar that saturated everything inside. This brilliant red pigment, derived from crushing the toxic mineral mercury sulfide, was not applied merely for decoration. To the ancient Maya, its vibrant color was profoundly symbolic, representing the life-giving power of blood, the promise of rebirth after death, and the sacred energy that connected the human world to the realm of the gods. This was a substance reserved for the most sacred and powerful rituals, and its extensive use here marked the burial as one of supreme importance. Covering the deceased in cinnabar was a key part of a transformative ritual, intended not just to preserve the body, but to prepare the soul for its arduous journey into the Maya afterlife, known as Xibalba. In Maya cosmology, death was not a final end, but a dangerous passage to another plane of existence. The sacred red powder was believed to imbue the body with a divine life force, consecrating it for an eventual rebirth or deification. The fact that this woman was bathed in the substance, much like the great King Puckle himself, suggested she was considered to be of equally high, perhaps even divine, status. The treasures buried alongside the Red Queen were not just markers of wealth, they were essential tools for her journey into the afterlife. Most prominent were the items crafted from jade, a material the Maya held more sacred than gold. The polished green stones symbolized maize, fertility, and eternal life, and its presence in the form of a delicate funerary mask. Heavy necklaces and bracelets signified her immense spiritual and political power. This mask was not a portrait, but a divine visage, designed to protect her soul and ensure her identity was preserved as she navigated the trials of the underworld. In addition to the magnificent jade, the tomb contained other objects rich with symbolic meaning. Spindly bone needles and sharp obsidian blades were found near the body, items that could have been used in life for textile work, or in ritual acts of auto-sacrifice and bloodletting. Also present were artifacts made from reddish spondylus shell, a rare and highly prized material brought from the distant Pacific coast. For the Maya, this shell was associated with water, fertility, and the underworld, making it a fitting offering to equip the deceased for her journey. Each object was a carefully chosen piece of a larger cosmological puzzle. The placement of the Red Queen's tomb is as significant as its contents. Her sarcophagus was discovered within Temple Tsesi, a relatively modest pyramid that stands directly adjacent to the monumental Temple of the Inscriptions, the final resting place of Palenque's most famous ruler, Kanich Janab Pakal. In a sacred city where architecture was meticulously planned to reflect cosmic and dynastic principles, this proximity was certainly not a coincidence. It was a deliberate statement in stone, suggesting a deep and essential connection between the woman in this tomb and the great king buried next door. From the moment of her discovery, scholars have worked to piece together the identity of this mysterious royal woman. The most compelling and widely accepted theory posits that the Red Queen was Ixzdipu Ajor, the esteemed wife of King Pakal the Great. She was a powerful figure in her own right, born into a noble family, and serving as the queen consort during Palenque's golden age. As the mother of at least two of Pakal's successors, her role in securing the dynastic lineage was absolutely critical, making her a plausible candidate for such an honoured and elaborate burial. Several pieces of evidence strongly support the theory that she was Pakal's wife. The most obvious is the tomb's location, placed intentionally beside her husband's grand mausoleum. Furthermore, the lavish and highly unusual use of cinnabar to cover the remains is a ritual practice that, at Palenque, has only been found in these two specific tombs, suggesting a mirrored and complementary status between the two individuals. This parallel treatment in death likely reflected their partnership in life, a sacred bond between king and queen that was meant to endure for eternity. To confirm the relationship, scientists attempted to compare DNA extracted from the Red Queen's remains with that of Pakal and his known descendants. However, the ancient DNA was too degraded to provide a definitive answer, and the results proved inconclusive. While the tests could not establish a direct maternal link between her and Pakal's children, this does not disprove the theory that she was his wife, as they would not have shared mitochondrial DNA. The scientific evidence remains ambiguous, leaving the mystery tantalizingly unsolved and forcing archaeologists to rely on the rich contextual clues of the burial itself. The complete absence of a name in the Red Queen's tomb, while puzzling, may not have been an oversight. Some experts speculate that this anonymity was intentional, rooted in a different understanding of how a soul endures. In Maya belief, a person's essence could be preserved not through inscribed glyphs but through powerful symbols, sacred materials, and the continuing performance of ritual. By burying her in a shroud of symbolic red, next to her husband, and within a sacred temple, her identity and power were being perpetuated in a way that transcended the written word, woven directly into the cosmic fabric of the city. To fully appreciate the significance of the Red Queen, one must understand the influential role held by royal women in classic Maya society. Contrary to outdated assumptions, these women were not merely passive consorts confined to the palace. They were central figures in the political and religious life of their kingdoms, acting as diplomats, sponsoring the construction of temples, and performing critical rituals to maintain cosmic balance and dynastic legitimacy. A queen's bloodline was a form of political capital, essential for forging alliances between city-states and securing her children's claim to the throne. The history of Palenque itself provides a powerful example of female power. Decades before the Red Queen's time, the city was ruled by a woman named Lady Sac Koch. When the throne was left vacant, without a suitable male heir, she took power directly and governed as Queen Regent, stabilizing the kingdom until her young son, the future King Pakal the Great, was old enough to rule. She was not a mere placeholder but a ruler in her own right, issuing decrees and overseeing state affairs. Her reign demonstrates that in the Maya world, women could and did wield supreme authority, setting a precedent for the powerful royal women who would follow. The case of Lady Sac Koch was not an anomaly in the Maya world. Inscriptions and stone monuments, or stela, discovered in cities like Naranjo, Calakmul, and Yaxchilan tell the stories of other formidable female leaders. One of the most famous is Lady Six Sky of Naranjo, who is depicted on monuments dressed as a warrior, standing triumphantly over her captives. These powerful portrayals are not merely symbolic, they are historical records showing that royal women could engage in warfare, rule as queens in their own right, and perform the most sacred religious ceremonies. This broader context helps us understand that the Red Queen's grand burial was part of a tradition that recognized and honored female power. The Red Queen's tomb, therefore, serves as a profound and silent testament to the complex and influential position of women within the highest echelons of Maya civilization. The immense care taken in her burial, the sacred materials chosen to accompany her, and the deliberate placement of her tomb next to her husband all speak to a society where female power was not only acknowledged, but was considered essential to the cosmic and political order. She may be nameless to us, but the archaeological evidence suggests that in her world, she was a central pillar of the dynasty, a keeper of sacred lineage whose influence was so great that it was meant to echo for all eternity, remembered not in words but in stone and scarlet. Frida Kahlo's story begins on July 6, 1907, within the vibrant walls of the Casa Azul, her family home in the Coyoacan district of Mexico City. Her heritage was a tapestry of contrasts. Her father, Guillermo, was a reserved German-Hungarian photographer, while her mother, Matilde, was a devoutly religious woman of Spanish and indigenous descent. Frida inherited her father's introspective and artistic sensibility, but it was her mother's fierce, unyielding resilience that would define her spirit. From her earliest years, she was known for her bold imagination, rebellious wit, and an unwillingness to accept the world at face value, qualities that set her apart from the start. At the age of 6, Frida's life was first marked by physical hardship when she contracted polio. The illness left her right leg permanently thinner and weaker than her left, a difference she would later conceal with long, traditional skirts. This period of isolation, which kept her bedridden for months, forged a deep and lasting bond with her father. He encouraged her to defy the limitations of her body, pushing her to swim, play sports, and, most importantly, to keep her mind sharp and inquisitive. This early battle with her own physical fragility instilled in her a defiant spirit and a refusal to be defined by her ailments, a resilience that would become her greatest weapon. On September 17, 1925, Frida's world was irrevocably shattered in a moment of screeching metal and splintering wood. The wooden bus she was riding home from school was struck by an electric streetcar, which crushed the vehicle against a wall in a catastrophic impact. The violent collision transformed a mundane afternoon into a scene of horrific carnage. For Frida, then just 18 years old, the accident was an apocalypse. It was the brutal event that would end her ambitions of becoming a doctor and set her on a new, unchosen path of chronic pain, endless surgeries, and profound artistic creation. Her life was violently split into two distinct chapters: the girl she was before and the artist she was forced to become. In the chaotic aftermath of the crash, a surreal and haunting detail emerged that would seem to foreshadow her artistic future. As rescuers pulled her mangled body from the wreckage, they noticed that she was covered in a shimmering dust. A packet of powdered gold she had been carrying had burst upon impact, blanketing her bleeding form in a glittering coat. This bizarre juxtaposition of horrific trauma and ethereal beauty, a broken ballerina dusted in gold, became a potent, unforgettable image. It was a moment where unbearable pain and strange, otherworldly splendor collided, a theme that would later define the very essence of her powerful and deeply personal art. Her recovery was a long and torturous process. For months, Frida was imprisoned in a full-body cast, lying flat on her back and battling excruciating pain and life-threatening infections. Confined to her bed at the Casa Azul, her dream of a medical career slipping away, she began to sink into despair. It was then that her parents intervened. Her father gave her a set of his oil paints and brushes, while her mother devised a special easel that could be suspended over her bed. A mirror was then placed on the canopy above her, giving Frida her one and only possible subject, herself. Out of this agony and stillness, an artist was born. Frida Kahlo famously stated, "I paint my own reality." She did not create fantastical dreamscapes. Instead, she turned her unflinching gaze inward, transforming her own physical and emotional suffering into the primary subject of her art. Her canvases became a visual diary of her pain, a brutally honest and deeply personal exploration of her fractured body and tormented soul. Unlike many artists of her time, she refused to sanitize or beautify her experiences. She painted her reality with a raw, unapologetic honesty that was often shocking to viewers, forcing them to confront the visceral truths of a life lived in constant negotiation with pain. In her 1944 masterpiece, The Broken Column, Frida presents one of the most direct and harrowing depictions of her physical state. She portrays herself naked from the waist up, her torso held together by a restrictive surgical brace. Her body is split open down the middle, revealing not a human spine, but a shattered, crumbling ionic column on the verge of complete collapse. Her skin is pierced with dozens of nails, symbolizing the constant, pervasive pain she endured. Yet, despite this visceral imagery of ruin, her face is stoic, and her gaze is direct and unbroken, shedding tears but refusing to show defeat. It is an iconic declaration of suffering and indomitable strength. Her 1939 painting, The Two Fridas, is a profound exploration of her internal turmoil and dual identity. Created shortly after her divorce from Diego Rivera, the large canvas features two identical self-portraits, seated side by side. On the right, the loved Frida sits in traditional Tijuana dress, her heart whole and holding a small portrait of Rivera. On the left is the unloved Frida, dressed in a European gown, her own heart exposed, torn and bleeding, its main artery severed by a pair of surgical scissors. The two figures are joined by a single vein, a fragile connection that the rejected Frida threatens to sever, beautifully illustrating her feelings of heartbreak and cultural conflict. Frida's identity was deeply intertwined with Mexicanidad, a post-revolutionary cultural movement that rejected European colonial influences and celebrated Mexico's rich indigenous roots. She became a living symbol of this movement. Her choice to wear traditional Tijuana dresses, with their vibrant colors and intricate embroidery, was far more than a fashion statement. It was a powerful political and cultural declaration. By embracing this attire and filling her home with pre-Columbian artifacts and Mexican folk art, she was visually aligning herself with the authentic, native soul of her homeland and positioning her art as a proud expression of national identity. In 1928, Frida's life collided with that of Diego Rivera, the monumental figure of Mexican muralism who would become both the greatest love and the greatest source of pain in her life. She famously said that she had suffered two grave accidents. The first was the bus crash, and the other was Diego. He was 2 decades her senior, a giant in both physical stature and artistic reputation. Their relationship was a whirlwind of creative passion, intellectual connection, and profound emotional turbulence, a bond that would define and shape the trajectory of her life and her art in ways that were both brilliant and devastating. Their marriage was a famously chaotic and passionate union. Diego was a steadfast champion of Frida's unique talent, encouraging her to develop her fiercely original artistic voice. However, he was also relentlessly unfaithful, and his numerous affairs caused Frida immense pain, culminating in a devastating betrayal when he had an affair with her own younger sister, Cristina. In response, Frida sought her own lovers, both men and women, asserting her independence. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later, unable to live apart despite the heartbreak their bond inevitably caused. Frida's convictions were not confined to her art. She was a committed and lifelong communist. Her political activism was a central part of her identity, and she and Diego moved in revolutionary circles. They famously used their home, the Casa Azul, to provide asylum for the exiled Russian revolutionary Leon Trotsky and his wife in 1937. During his stay, Frida and the much older Trotsky engaged in a brief but passionate affair, a relationship conducted through secret notes and clandestine meetings. This blend of art, politics, and revolutionary fervor was a defining characteristic of her extraordinary life. In 1953, Frida was finally honored with her first solo exhibition in her home country of Mexico. It was a long overdue recognition of her genius, but by this time, her health was so fragile that her doctors forbade her from attending. In a move of characteristic defiance and theatrical flair, Frida decided she would go anyway. She arranged to be transported to the gallery by ambulance, and she made her grand entrance on a hospital stretcher, which was then placed in her own 4-poster bed set up in the center of the room. There she held court, greeting guests, singing songs, and celebrating her triumph amidst the art that her pain had created. Frida Kahlo passed away on July 13, 1954, at the age of 47. in the same blue house where she had been born. While the official cause of death was a pulmonary embolism, many of those closest to her suspected she had taken her own life, exhausted by the relentless cycle of pain and surgery. Her final diary entry, written just days before her death, was a poignant and piercing farewell. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." It was a heartbreaking conclusion to a life that had been a constant, heroic battle against the limitations of her own body. In the years immediately following her death, Frida Kahlo's work was largely overshadowed by that of her husband, Diego Rivera, and the other male muralists. Her art was considered too personal, too strange, and too difficult to categorize. However, her legacy began to experience a powerful resurgence in the 1970s and 1980s, when her work was rediscovered and championed by feminist art historians and activists. They saw in her unflinching self-portraits a revolutionary voice that had been overlooked, a woman who had dared to put female experience, in all its pain and beauty, at the very center of her artistic universe. Frida Kahlo has become a global feminist icon because she shattered conventions and created a new, unapologetic language for female experience. At a time when women were expected to be beautiful, passive objects of the male gaze, Frida seized the brush and became the powerful narrator of her own story. She depicted the raw, often hidden, realities of being a woman, exploring everything from miscarriage and infertility to heartbreak and physical suffering, with a brutal honesty that was revolutionary. She refused to be just a muse. She became the artist, the subject, and the master of her own complex narrative. Her fearless and open exploration of her own sexuality has also cemented her status as an enduring queer icon. In a deeply conservative and Catholic society, Frida lived her life with remarkable openness, engaging in affairs with both men and women. Her art often challenged traditional gender roles. She famously depicted herself in masculine attire and possessed an androgynous beauty that defied easy categorization. For LGBT communities, she represents a powerful historical figure who lived and loved unapologetically, offering a symbol of courage and authenticity that continues to inspire. Frida is also celebrated as a pioneering disability icon because she refused to hide the physical ailments that defined her life. Instead of viewing her shattered body as a source of shame, she transformed it into a central and powerful theme of her art. She unflinchingly depicted her surgical corsets, her crutches, and her wounds not as pleas for pity, but as symbols of her lived reality and her defiant will to create. By placing her disability at the forefront of her work, she challenged conventional standards of beauty and wholeness, making her a powerful symbol of resistance and empowerment for disabled people everywhere. For her home country, Frida Kahlo is far more than just a famous painter. She is a cherished national treasure and a powerful symbol of Mexican cultural pride. Through her art and her personal style, she championed the nation's indigenous heritage, rejecting European standards and celebrating the beauty of Mexican folk traditions. Her embrace of traditional Tijuana clothing, her use of vibrant colors, and her incorporation of pre-Columbian symbolism helped to forge a proud and distinct visual identity for post-revolutionary Mexico. Today, her image is synonymous with the fierce, resilient, and colorful soul of the nation she so deeply loved. In the decades since her death, Frida Kahlo has transcended the art world to become a global pop culture phenomenon. Her unique and unforgettable face, with its signature unibrow, intense gaze, and flower-adorned hair, has become an instantly recognizable symbol printed on everything from t-shirts and coffee mugs to murals and protest signs. This widespread adoption of her image speaks to her universal appeal. She has become a global shorthand for authenticity, creative resistance, and the defiant celebration of individuality in a world that often demands conformity. The enduring power of Frida's legacy lies in the raw, universal truth of her work. Her paintings resonate so deeply with people from all walks of life, because they are a testament to the human ability to transform suffering into something sacred and meaningful. She did not just paint her pain, she dissected it, analyzed it, and gave it a visual form that allows others to see their own struggles reflected in her art. For anyone who has ever felt broken, betrayed, or marginalized, her work offers a profound sense of validation and a powerful reminder that there is beauty to be found in our scars. Frida Kahlo's life and art were a masterclass in the embrace of contradiction. She was a committed communist who adorned herself in beautiful clothing and gold jewelry, a woman who endured profound betrayal yet never stopped loving fiercely, and an artist whose body was constantly in pieces, but whose spirit remained unbreakable. She navigated these complexities without apology, understanding that human identity is not simple or singular. This ability to hold multiple, often conflicting, truths at once is central to her appeal, making her a relatable and deeply human figure, not just a static historical icon. Ultimately, Frida Kahlo did not ask to become a symbol. She simply insisted on telling the truth about her own life with unflinching honesty. In doing so, she inadvertently told the truth for millions of others who had never seen themselves represented in the hallowed halls of art before. She gave a voice to the marginalized, the broken, the outsiders, and the rebels. Her greatest legacy is this radical act of validation. When we look at her face or her paintings today, we see more than just an artist. We see courage, we see resistance, and we see the immortal power of a woman who dared to turn her own reality into a legend.